Hey, Bastish B here for 64K and welcome to another video special. This one is going to feature a really obscure Super Famicom game called Rendering Ranger R2 by classic Commodore 64 programmer Manfred Trenz. And today I'll also be joined by Audie Sawley, friend of the channel from Limited Run Games, and also Alex, managing producer over at Ziggurat Interactive. Both of them are responsible for bringing this game back to modern audiences in both physical and digital form. Seeing as this is Alex's first time on this channel, I'll let him introduce himself.
My name is Alex Lotz. I'm based in the United States, and I'm the managing producer at Ziggurat Interactive.
And all of us are really big Manfred Trenz fans, so I hope you enjoy this look at one of his final big shoot-'em-up masterpieces. So before we get stuck into the game, let's go all the way back to the mid-90s and get a brief history of the making of the game. Rendering Ranger began life way back in 1992 by legendary German programmer Manfred Trenz. His big jump to 16-bit console gaming, which is games in essence, despite being computer games, always had that large Japanese console vibe to them, with their tight gameplay, fast pace, unrelenting action, and pulling out all the programming tricks that should not be possible on said systems like the Commodore 64 and Amiga. Targa, as the game was originally called, was a horizontal shooter, much in the vein of gems he had already done like Catechus and Full Metal Mega Blaster on the C64. Due in one part to the Super Nintendo's lower clock speed, not optimal for this style of game, Manfred had to perform miracles to bring his vision to life on that system. About 2 years later, in 1995, it was finally complete. Unfortunately, in that time, gaming had taken a leap to 3D, and even the 16-bit market had embraced the silicon graphics style of Donkey Kong Country and other games. Manfred's 16-bit pixel look was considered outdated. Rainbow Arts struggled to find any way to release the game. The European and US markets had simply moved on. The game then had a complete overhaul, adding in run-and-gun Turrican-style stages and embracing the new silicon graphics rendering look, hence the name change to Rendering Ranger. It wasn't enough though to entice the major regions. Fortunately, Virgin Interactive's Japanese division stepped up to release the game in Japan for the Super Famicom, with a very small 5,000 print run of the game, although way less actually made it out to the store shelves, making it one of the rarest games ever released on the system, and leaving the real Trenz fans out of luck with ever being able to play his final shooter masterpiece. Manfred was disillusioned and pretty much retreated from the scene almost completely. He still completed a few smaller handheld projects and left one, Catechus 3D, a follow-up to his 1988 classic, now on the Game Boy Color, unreleased, and no distributors would step up for its launch. One of Europe's most celebrated coders was completely defeated. But thanks in recent years to the explosion of nostalgia and the rise of gaming preservation, rendering is now back in both physical and soon, as of making this, digital forms. So now not only fans but everyone can finally play this hidden gem in its full official glory. And now that you know a bit about the history, it's time to meet the game. Rendering Ranger puts you in the boots of a Special Forces soldier, the Ranger, known as Double R, Earth's problem solver against an alien invasion. His mission is simply to infiltrate an alien base, steal one of their ships, and use that to make his way to the Hive and wipe them out. The game is pretty much everything Manfred did best. Run-and-gun platformer action and fast-paced horizontal and vertical space shoot-'em-up segments. It's a full-on arcade-style blitzkrieg, which led me to asking Audie whether he actually got to play this game during its original 1995 release.
So Rendering Ranger R2 was a game that I became aware of through the magazines kind of around the mid-90s. I forget if it was like GamePro or Superplay or one of those. But I do remember that I saw some screenshots of it, and in magazines especially, it just looked unlike most other games I had seen at the time. Kind of like a continuation of Donkey Kong Country and these kinds of games. It just looked incredible when you saw like an off-screen screenshot. But it wasn't a game I played back in the day, so to speak. I think the first time I actually played it would have been through emulation in the late 90s. It always kind of mystified me though, because it did feel like a game that was kind of missing. It exists, but it kind of is missing, because getting a hold of it was impossible. I remember when I worked in Japan, if this game came up or if I saw it, it still had this mystical feeling to it because the price tag was just so astronomically high. So it felt like I could never quite obtain it. So even though I had played it, and quite loved it, being that I'm from Europe and it has some similarities to other European classics. I was very happy whenever I heard about it, whenever I talked about it, whenever I played it, but it's one of those games that certainly had an aura, and I do wish that I actually did play it as it came out.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Gameplay and rendering is boiled down into two styles: straightforward run-and-gun action in the vein of Manfred's most well-known games, the Turrican series. The levels, though, are linear in nature and not as open-ended as those games, giving it a much more straightforward arcade vibe. You get access to 4 different weapon types, which translates to the ship stages as well. And in typical Trenz style, they are represented in different colored orbs to pick up pretty much exactly like Catechus, Turrican, and Enforcer. Which really begs the question, do all these games take place in the same universe? It certainly feels like it. You also have a mega shot, which you can collect up to 3 to destroy everything on screen. They differ based on the currently selected weapon. The ship stages are an absolute rush, fast-paced game segments involving not only horizontal action but vertical sections as well. Massive spaceship takedowns, kinda like an R-Type, and copious amounts of giant boss encounters to top off the 9 levels. Your ship can be flipped in different directions based on the flow of the attacks. The speed can also be adjusted on the fly to maneuver tricky situations, and the fire types you have on land are translated to the ship sequences, and you can also have up to 3 slots for mega blasts for desperate times. I then asked Alex what it is about rendering that made them want to re-release this game for modern audiences.
Some of our main goals as a publisher include preservation and increasing the availability of games that deserve to continue to be played. There was a clear opportunity for this in the case of Rendering Ranger, as the original was only released on Super Famicom in Japan. There were versions of the game in development for America and Europe, but these never saw an official release. We also saw this as a game worth preserving and re-releasing because it still holds up quite well, both as a run-and-gun game and as a ship shooter. Also, as fans of Super Nintendo and Super Famicom games in general, Rendering Ranger stands out to us as one of the best showcases of that hardware that we've ever seen. Those of us that have played quite a bit of the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom library also can clearly see that Rendering Ranger is a technical marvel on the system. We also think it's a game worth preserving as it's one of the great showcases of Super Nintendo and Super Famicom hardware. When you see the range of rendering techniques on display, it's amazing that it's able to happen at all, let alone in a game that continues to maintain a 60 frames per second frame rate.
The graphics in this game are fantastic. It's a bit darker than Manfred's usual fare, but still has all the hallmarks of his distinct style. Destroyed cities, spaceship battles, metallic military bases, and of course biomechanical alien halves. It's Manfred in 16-bit form. The silicon-rendered graphics work well. They definitely give the game a 90s vibe, but there's no reason why that's a bad thing. I asked both Alex and Audie what the games of Manfred really meant to them personally.
Oh man, where to even begin on this question? So I'm one of those rare kids that played Gianna Sisters before I played Super Mario, so I would say that his games meant a lot to me. When I played them back in the day on my C64 and eventually a little bit on the Amiga and such, it always felt like just the contrasts of the graphical design, the level layout, like there was always like a slight sinister nature to them, which can be felt in Rendering Ranger as well. But you see it throughout the games they did, even like Kataka's, Turk, and Gianna Sisters. There's kind of like an underlying terror to them that's so unsettling, but at the same time, especially when you look at the game development from Germany, Spain, you know, he was on a different level. He was someone that definitely studied the Japanese gameplay styles like the Metroids and Super Marios and such, and kind of not just understood them at a different level, but managed to take his own spin on it, which for the most part other companies and other developers kind of struggled with.
We're always amazed that the whole game can maintain such a consistent and smooth frame rate, even while there's so much action and so many objects flying around on the screen. Around the time of the original release, people might have expected a game like this to be more likely to be made for Genesis, and that the Super Nintendo might not be suited to this kind of thing, but Manfred Trenz proved with his technical abilities that he could do it.
The shooter segments are highly detailed and absolute sprite overload, something you were used to seeing on Mega Drive games like the Thunder Force series, but not commonly on the Super Nintendo without a decent amount of slowdown. The bosses are also crazy huge with Mode 7 style effects and even these multi-screen monstrosities to take down.
And eventually, of course, I got to work with people like Andreas Escher and Chris Hulsbeck, these people that had been in his circle back then. And just the reverence they had for him made him kind of shine in a different light as I started working in the industry myself. And now I look at his games and I just have like an incredible respect for him and feel like he's a little bit underrated on a global sense. He was someone that really stood out.
We also think this game is worth re-releasing as showcasing the great design and technical talents of Manfred Trenz. Trenz helped pioneer both run and gun and ship shooter mechanics on a range of systems and was able to achieve things on the hardware that people never expected, from the Commodore 64 days all the way up through Amiga and Super Nintendo.
Musically, the soundtrack is quite a mix of styles, with everything from old-style grand movie soundtracks that sound a lot like the Wing Commander soundtrack to me, 90s dance-style techno beats, and quick-paced Thunder Force guitar jams. It's eclectic, to say the least. It's not my favorite of the scores of all his games, but it's still pretty damn solid in retrospect. I am a Sid junkie after all. I love the sound effects though, they are meaty and give the action a lot of edge. It makes destroying anything in this game super satisfying, and that's a big compliment, especially for a game in this genre. I was curious though and asked Alex if there was any major roadblocks, publishing-wise, to get this game re-released.
For some retro games, it's not always easy to clearly identify who the owner is and who you would need to buy or license the rights from, but in this case we were fortunate enough to have a connection to the owner of the Rainbow Arts catalog. One of Ziggurat's top priorities was re-releasing Rendering Ranger. We did this first as a physical cartridge for Super Nintendo through Limited Run Games. The next release will be using Limited Run's Carbon Engine technology to bring it to digital platforms. Another Rainbow Arts release that we have coming soon is X-Out Resurfaced, so keep an eye out for that as well as future Rainbow Arts announcements.
Overall, Rendering Ranger is an excellent end to Manfred's shooter legacy. It's a pity we only got one 16-bit console game. I would have loved to see what he could have done on the Mega Drive, but I guess we'll never know. I, like Audi, played Geonisys many years before Super Mario Bros., so his games have a special place in my heart. This game also I played through emulation for the first time in the late 90s to early 2000s. It was literally the only way you could play it, and could not understand how this game was passed over and barely got released. It's insane if you really think about it. Having an actual physical copy now though to play is pretty amazing, and thanks to everyone involved in bringing this lost Manfred classic finally to the masses. Rendering Ranger physical pre-orders open on the 14th of February with a digital version announcement coming pretty soon, so look out for that. Links to the physical pre-order are in the video description.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And this video can't be complete without a look at the physical re-release of this game and my final question to Audi. And the question was, how important is it to you that classic overlooked games get physical re-releases in the modern age?
It really is the most important aspect of my work in the games industry and what really drives my passion as a whole. It's not simply about preservation, it's about creating history by celebrating history. And it's important to look across the entire field of games, not just remaster like the gold classics or get the biggest names back on modern systems. It's all about creating unique products such as this. Because like I mentioned, this is a game that's been for like 3 decades now, the most expensive and unobtainable games, and not just for the system it was on, but really in all of gaming. And being able to help this underappreciated game become available for a new generation is really special to me. I think you agree with me and most of your audience that like there's something really special about being able to hold a game, insert it into your console, playing it. It's something that's been exciting to us since we were kids. kids, and to make sure that we can continue to share that passion, that excitement. That's really why we're all here. So I do hope we see some videos of kids just putting that cartridge in their system and like playing Rendering Ranger R2.
And that's it. That's my look at Rendering Ranger R2. I just want to thank everybody that joined me today in the video. Also check out the links below for all digital and physical versions. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can please like and subscribe, I'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.